National Enquirer kept damaging stories about President Trump locked away in a safe.
The longtime friend of the president's who helped catch and kill negative stories about
The president did not commit a crime.
The inquiring minds want to know what is in the safe.
What is fast becoming one of the worst weeks for President Trump since he took office.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the stories we're covering this week. Inquiring minds, prosecutors, and the American news media all want to know, what does the man in charge of the National Enquirer have on Donald Trump? Out of Amsterdam and into Darfur, the radio station that beams news and information to citizens left in the dark. Facebook takes down another 20 accounts in Myanmar, among them the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And no one can read the mind of the White House press secretary. But we can read her lips.
I just can't stand the faces of you people.
Badly. The question in Washington these days is not just where is the Mueller investigation into President Donald Trump going, but who is next? After seeing both his lawyer, Michael Cohen, and a central figure in his business empire, Weisselberg, agree to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for immunity, Trump then learned that David Pecker, a longtime friend and a key media player, had done the same. Pecker is the chairman of American Media Inc., AMI, which owns the National Enquirer, a supermarket tabloid not known for stellar journalism. The Enquirer is part of the Trump story, not just because of the stories it published, but because of the ones it didn't. The practice is known as catch and kill. It works like this. If someone had a potentially damaging story about Donald Trump for sale, the Enquirer would buy it and bury it so that that bad news would never see the light of day. What about the legal precedent, though? A newspaper under investigation. To that, prosecutors argue the Enquirer is no news outlet, it's a political tool. Our starting point this week is New York City. They're dropping like flies, flipping like pancakes. One by one, some of Donald Trump's closest confidants have become witnesses for the possible prosecution of the president.
Those people are Michael Cohen, who was Trump's longtime personal attorney and his longtime fixer. And you also now have Weisselberg, who was the CFO of the Trump organization and was sort of the guy who took care of Trump's money. And David Pecker, who headed the group that owned the National Enquirer and kept a lot of Trump secrets. So you have the guy who got rid of his legal troubles, the guy who got rid of his money problems, and the guy who got rid of his scandals, now all cooperating in these investigations.
And the notion now that David Pecker might flip on Donald Trump is a surreal, huge development. I don't think you can overstate it, because the fact of the matter is, I think these two guys know a lot about each other. And if one of them starts talking about the other one, in this case, the publisher talking about the president, there's no end where that will go, but it cannot be good for Donald Trump.
The publication that David Pecker controls, the National Enquirer, holds a unique, seedy place in the American media landscape. Founded in 1926, it's a supermarket tabloid, and it goes where other papers do not, openly paying sources for stories of the most sensational kind. During the 2016 presidential election campaign, the Enquirer's support for Donald Trump was flagrant. It lauded the candidate, went after his Republican rivals with dubious allegations, and then did the same with Hillary Clinton. The Enquirer's journalism was not worthy of having an effect on the election's outcome. However, given its visibility, it may well have.
The National Enquirer is a trashy tabloid. It's not even political, right? Most of its coverage is about celebrity scandals, half of which are not true. However, it does have a prominent place in U.S. culture, both for the kind of just pleasure of reading the salacious gossip that it propounds, and also because physically, in all supermarkets across the nation, the National Enquirer is found right at the checkout line.
The cover of the National Enquirer is seen by millions and millions of people who are low information voters who don't even need to buy the magazine, and they read the headline and they think, at least a lot of them do, that it's at least credible, if not totally real. That's something you literally cannot purchase. It was very obvious that the National Enquirer, through Donald Trump's friendship with David Pecker, was an arm of the Trump campaign. In fact, they were doing things that a campaign would never dream of trying to get away with.
The National Enquirer is also where stories go to die, when those stories are potentially damaging to Donald Trump. In August of 2016, just months before the election, the Enquirer paid a former Playboy model, Karen McDougal, $150,000 for her story of an affair with Trump. The agreement stipulated that McDougal could not tell her story to anyone else, but the Enquirer never published it. It caught the story, then effectively killed it. And the paper did the same with a story alleging Trump had fathered a child out of wedlock in the late 1980s. And those are just the catch and kill stories involving Trump and the Enquirer that we know about. No one would be shocked if there were others.
What David Pecker does is he buys the rights to those stories, but then he never publishes those stories. Those stories never see the light of day. He keeps them in a safe, but in return, David Pecker gets other things from Trump, other stories, other bits of gossip, and he trades on that with Donald Trump.
If you go out and pay a substantial amount of money for a story, and then you put that story aside, you kill it during the course of a campaign, you are effectively making a campaign contribution. If we've got a circumstance where information that would be of interest to the great mass of people is being pulled out of the process and hidden on behalf of a particular candidate, it's hard not to see that as beneficial to the candidate.
So they are both responsible for burnishing his reputation as well as for making sure that negative coverage of him did not come to light. So the fact that Pecker is now working for the investigation means that all of the knowledge of those stories, and we only know a couple, but it's likely that there's more, are now going to become known by the investigators into Trump and into potential collusion.
How worried is Donald Trump about what kind of stories the Enquirer has under lock and key? According to the New York Times, very. It reported this past week that Trump tried to buy those stories from AMI just prior to the 2016 election, but that an agreement between him and David Pecker was never reached. And Trump isn't the only American concerned by the fact that the Enquirer is under investigation and the potential legal precedent this case could set. Newspapers, even ones like the Enquirer, are constitutionally protected under the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of the press.
I believe in a very broad interpretation of the First Amendment, and that even a gossip publication, they have a full right to invoke those protections because it is often on the margins that stories that need to be told are first told. And so I think we still have to be very conscious of the right of editors and publishers, writers, to assert freedom of the press protections.
Well, this might not be a newsflash to everybody, but the National Enquirer doesn't do journalism. You know, there's a big difference between being biased in someone's behalf and doing their dirty work, working with their fixer, Michael Cohen, to shut people up who might have negative stories about Donald Trump. The claim here is that the National Enquirer was effectively making a campaign contribution to Donald Trump, and that would be a violation of our campaign finance laws.
Donald Trump first rose to prominence decades ago in New York. For that, he had the city's tabloids to thank. His brash persona suited the Daily News and the New York Post far better than the New York Times. They could not get enough of him. These days, the Times is among the outlets Trump targets.
They are the fake, disgusting news.
And labels the enemy of the American people. Now, as the prosecutors appear to be closing in, the biggest threat posed to the president comes not from the Times, CNN, or the Washington Post. It comes from a tabloid, and all the news that the National Enquirer did not consider fit to print. We're looking at other media stories that are on our radar this week with one of our producers, Will Yong. Will, Facebook has taken down 20 accounts in Myanmar, including some belonging to senior government officials. Who are they?
Well, undoubtedly the biggest name among them is the Commander-in-Chief of Myanmar's armed forces, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing. Others taken down include more military figures and the army-controlled Myawaddy TV channel. Now, this comes after a UN report recommending that 6 military leaders, including General Min, be investigated by the International Criminal Court in The Hague for their part in genocide, crimes against humanity and the war crimes against Rohingya Muslims. Now, additionally, Facebook has removed dozens more accounts for so-called inauthentic behaviour, which in this case refers to pushing the messages of the Myanmar military under the guise of independent news and commentary.
And this isn't the first time that Facebook has had to scramble to salvage its reputation in Myanmar over its role in politics there, is it?
No, it isn't. Earlier this year, Facebook banned a number of ultra-nationalist Buddhist monks from the site for anti-Muslim hate speech. But still, just 2 weeks ago, Reuters published a report showing that hundreds of posts calling for violence against Muslims were still accessible. Now, remember that Facebook is basically synonymous with the internet in Myanmar. It's that dominant. And UN investigators say hate speech hosted by the platform played a determining role in violence that has driven 700,000 Rohingyas across the border into Bangladesh. Facebook, for its part, has admitted, not for the first time, that it's been too slow to respond to the problem.
Moving on to the UK now, the broadcast regulator in Britain has ruled that a television channel, Sky TV, has broken the rules by airing advertisements that were paid for by the government of Saudi Arabia. What's the story there?
Well, it relates to the visit of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the UK 5 months ago. Now, during his 3-day visit, a minute-long TV ad for Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 project appeared 56 times on the British TV channel Sky One. The ad was a polished presentation of a country ushering in big changes in the fields of culture, society and the economy. And the takeaway message was that partnership with Britain brings benefits to both countries. But the UK broadcast regulator Ofcom ruled this week that the ad violated regulations on paid political advertising, stating that it was, quote, intended to influence public opinion in the UK on matters of public controversy. Now, at the time of bin Salman's visit, there were protests and questions in Parliament regarding Britain's strong support for Saudi Arabia, despite its poor human rights record and the devastating Saudi-led war in Yemen.
So that's the ruling. What about the consequences, though? Will there be lasting repercussions from this decision?
It would seem not. Sky says the ad was cleared by the advertising industry screening service Clearcast, which disagreed with Ofcom's ruling, arguing that the ad was promoting trade with Saudi Arabia, which they said was in line with British foreign policy. But Saudi Arabia and other countries will have to think twice before running similar ads in the future, and Sky will have to do the same before airing them.
OK, thanks, Will. It's been more than 15 years now since the conflict in Darfur in western Sudan began, but there's no end in sight to the fighting. The government continues its attacks on insurgents and the region's non-Arab and African civilians, a campaign that the United Nations has called a genocide, one that has led to the International Criminal Court's indictment of Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. However, with the authorities preventing journalists going in and information coming out, Darfur has turned into a black hole for news. As a result, one broadcaster has proven to be critically important, Radio Dabanga. Beaming in from Amsterdam to remain beyond the reach of government censors, the station has become a rare source of independent news for what it says are its more than 3 million daily listeners. But the broadcaster's funding is drying up, meaning that Dabanga could soon see its doors closed for good. The Listening Post's Johanna Husnow from Amsterdam on the role of Radio Dabanga in a region that has seen its media environment blacked out by design.
مقتل 3 نازحين وجرح 12 في هجوم الدعم السريع على معسكرات غارسيلا.
For a family on the run in Darfur, unsure whether the next village will be any safer than the one they just fled, Radio Dabanga can mean the difference between life and death.
الطيران الحكومي بيواصل غصبه لشركة جبل لليوم الثالث على التوالي وبيقتل وبيجرح عدد من المواطنين.
The small station, run by exiled Darfuri thousands of miles away, has been trying to keep those back home safe, as well as providing listeners with much-needed insight into one of the most sealed-off regions in the world. Editor-in-chief Kamal El-Sadiq says that Dabanga has become much more than just a shortwave radio station.
It's become the lungs with which Sudanese people breathe. By reporting on security, safety, displacement, health, issues fundamental to the survival of Sudanese people. For example, there was a cholera breakout which the government denied, claiming it was severe diarrhea. Dabanga didn't just create awareness, it also offered advice. Or when the war was raging in Darfur, we were informing people where the fighting was taking place, so they had information on how to get to safety. Technically, Dabanga has saved their lives.
While other media outlets in Sudan are censored, Dabanga's location in Amsterdam allows its journalists to report freely. The government and its state media outlets claim the Darfur crisis is over, but Dabanga tells a different story. They report on the absence of security, the poor conditions in the camps, the number of victims, casualties, the number of those displaced. The government doesn't want that side of the crisis to come out.
It's a known fact that they've created a total media blackout. But millions of Darfuri want to know what's happening around them. Unfortunately, none of the mainstream media here will cover the conflict. But because Radio Dabanga operates from outside, and those providing the station with information are unknown to the authorities, it makes it much safer for them to do their work.
That network of citizen journalists, often undercover, as well as ordinary civilians, are what Dabanga relies on to produce its reports. Via their phones and social media, they send information back to Dabanga's headquarters in Holland, shedding light on a region that the government prefers to keep in the dark.
We receive more than 100 calls a day, and our Dabanga WhatsApp can get up to 1,000 messages. It's all preliminary information that our wide network of reporters on the ground then verifies and authenticates. Only after careful investigation do we publish stories. This is what gives Dabanga its credibility and fame. When we report to the people in Sudan, we support our news with evidence from the ground.
Radio Dabanga's dependence on civilians as sources of information has been used by President Omar al-Bashir's administration to discredit the station. Ever since Dabanga's launch in 2008, Khartoum has gone to great lengths to silence the broadcaster, questioning its credibility or even cutting its signal. The government body that regulates the media is the National Council for Press and Publications. According to its Secretary General, Dabanga is in the business of spreading fake news.
It's fundamentally important for the credibility of news that all sources must be verified, as well as objective, void of any personal or ulterior motives. Much or maybe most of Dabanga's news items lack such veracity. This was most evident in 2014 when they spread erroneous news reports about an alleged mass rape in the area of Tebet. Those alleged mass rapes caused widespread hysteria, but when proper investigations were conducted by unbiased governmental organizations, the information turned out to be false.
There was a mass rape of girls and women, over 200, ordered by the regular army commander, the nearby base. The story itself and the nature of this extraordinarily barbaric act and who ordered it, that all came originally from Radio Dabanga. Now, some of the details had to be corrected, but Human Rights Watch, a number of months later, would confirm everything that Radio Dabanga was reporting. Who is to say, though, that a mistake has been made? Who is the alternative source of information?
There is one, the United Nations and African Union Joint Peacekeeping Mission in Darfur, UNAMID, but there have been serious questions about the accuracy and credibility of its reports. The operation was set up in 2007 to protect civilians and monitor the situation on the ground. But in 2013, its former spokesperson, Aisha al-Basri, blew the whistle, saying that for years, UNAMID used every trick to conceal the truth about deliberate government bombings, mass killings, and forced displacement of unarmed civilians.
The UN African Union mission is an important source of information in Darfur. However, I don't believe it paints the complete picture because these very same organizations have interests that converge with that of the Sudanese government. Sure, it provides us with significant information because journalists can't access the area at all. But those agencies fall short of giving us a comprehensive picture of the situation.
The UN African Union mission in Darfur is almost worthless as a reporting source. UNAMID just lied shamelessly, claimed that they've been completely successful, that all their goals have been achieved, there was no fighting, just small arms banditry, and this was nonsense, and they knew it was nonsense, but they couldn't afford to say publicly just how great the failure was. They won't say anything that Khartoum doesn't allow them to say. And in that sense, without the lifeline of Radio Dabanga News, the lives and livelihoods of people in Darfur are at deep, deep risk.
Despite the critically important role that Radio Dabanga plays for Sudanese audiences, the broadcaster now finds its future under threat. The station relies on funds from a consortium of EU states and NGOs. But European governments are now working with the Sudanese authorities to fight terrorism and to stem the flow of refugees heading north. And that is having serious effects on the station's funding. It's drying up, which could mean that Radio Dabanga's days are numbered.
The crux of the issue is the collaboration between the Sudanese government and the international community, whose priorities have shifted substantially. Terrorism and immigration seem to be their only priority nowadays, and issues like press freedom have taken a back seat. If Radio Dabanga were to close, not only would citizens lose their daily dose of information, it would be a great loss to press freedom in Sudan.
I think without Radio Dabanga, we lose touch with what's happening in Darfur. Because there are no journalists, because there's no human rights reporting presence, we don't have any way of knowing where people are starving, where malnutrition is extreme, where rape is occurring, where farmers are being driven off their lands, murdered by Arab militias. Khartoum's goal has always been to make it a black box, to make it an invisible place, and they're very, very close to success at this point. If we lose Radio Dabanga, we lose sight of Darfur.
And finally, it was just a matter of time until the people or the person behind the YouTube channel BLR gave White House spokesperson Sarah Huckabee Sanders the bad lip-reading treatment. BLR has been at this for years now. The channel racks up huge numbers, taking videos from the world of news and entertainment, then overdubbing them with completely inappropriate words that somehow seem to match the lip movements. To be clear, Ms. Huckabee Sanders says none of the nasty things that she appears to say to the White House press corps in the following video. But you get the feeling, reading her body language, that she wishes she could. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
I need a drink. Okay, idiots, are you ready? I just can't stand the faces of you people. Those dead, questioning eyes. You dummies don't matter. Greedo?
Hey, the way you talk to me, I mean, do you need to talk so evil?
Do you need to look like a stuffed baked potato in that Walmart shirt? 'Cause you suck. Chocolate curl. You know how I was part of a gang that made bed quilts?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this one guy, Benji Binkelman, had this horrible breast problem. Okay, so maybe we'll just wrap that up, turd. What I really need is a craft table, a magic wand, and someone to feed me pickles. Okay, Jeeves?
Do you feel you prefer ice sheets or maybe like summer rain?
Or I could feed you to the polar bears?
All right.
Gina? It's Gina. That's what I said. Gina. Gina. I'm sorry? Gina? Yeah, I don't know. Chachi? Stink leg? Bork? Varicose Ken?
Hey, I'm crazy about you. When can I see you?
No, never sounds like a good day.
Hey, I'm sensitive yet dangerous, and I make nachos.
Okay, to be honest, I think that most people in the world will find you disappointing.
Why are you saying this?
Because you suck.